I'm David Alderton, editor of Practical Reptile Keeping magazine, and I'd like to take you on a journey to find your ideal tortoise pet. We're here today looking at the different types of Mediterranean tortoise that you can encounter and to discuss a bit about them and the different care requirements. So there are four basic Mediterranean tortoises. They are the Afghan tortoise, which is the smallest, the Hermanns tortoise. Going through the size, we're going to then to the Mediterranean spur-thighed, and the biggest member of the group, which is a marginated tortoise. This is Horsfield's tortoise, which is the smallest of the group, as I've mentioned. And if you look, you can see it's got a very oval-shaped shell, quite distinctive, whereas the other species have a longer but thinner shell. Horsfield's tortoise comes further north than any other tortoise on the planet, in fact, ranging up to a 52-degree north latitude. So it's a pretty hardy species, but it doesn't like damp climates. So don't assume that you buy a Horsfield's tortoise and it's going to be happy outside. It won't be. It's no more hardy in that sense than any other of the tortoises. They're full of personality, but they do burrow. They really instinctively burrow down deeply, more so than some of the other Mediterranean species. And in addition, their body shape perhaps facilitates climbing. These are Hermann's tortoises, and they come from the northern shores of the Mediterranean Sea. They don't occur further south, they go up into the Balkan area as well. It's the eastern population of Hermann's tortoise that is well represented in collections today, and they can grow somewhere between 6 and 11 inches overall, so they can get quite large. The males tend to be a bit smaller than the females on average, but you can distinguish them very easily indeed. If you look at this one here, you can see the great curve of the tail coming around, which ends in a horny tip, and this is what sets the Hermann's tortoise apart very simply from other members of the Mediterranean tortoise group. The Mediterranean spur-thighed tortoise, which we can see here, is the longest kept pet reptile in Britain. There's records of these tortoises having been kept here since the 1600s. If you look here, you can see the distinctive spurs that give this tortoise its name. Although it isn't the only so-called spurred tortoise, inasmuch there is an African species which grows to a very much bigger size, the African spurred tortoise, also Carter tortoise. And it's important you don't confuse the two, because if you obtain the wrong species by mistake, you're going to need a very different type of setup. One of the interesting things about the Mediterranean spur-thighed is how its size varies through its range, because it's actually found on both sides of the Mediterranean Sea, and it's actually populations in North Africa, such as the Libyan, that are the smaller ones compared with those that occur further north in Europe. The final member of this group is the marginated tortoise, which we can see here, and it gets its name from the flared marginals, this part of the shell. The marginated tortoise has the smallest range of the Mediterranean species, being confined mainly to southern Greece, extending up into the Balkans and part of Italy. But on the other hand, it's also the largest of the European species and can grow up to a length of about 15 inches. So, is there much difference in temperament between these tortoises, you might ask? I would say yes, there was. I would say that the Mediterranean spur-thighed is more placid perhaps than the Hermanns. Young male Hermanns in particular can be very aggressive by nature and will chase females quite relentlessly around in an enclosed environment. The marginated is a species that obviously, as it gets bigger, you're potentially going to need more space for. And the Afghan tortoise is a species that does like to spend quite a bit of time burrowed down, whether it's burrowed in the substrate or burrowed in the soil. So it's not out perhaps as much as the Mediterranean spur-thighed, for example, would be. When you see a cute group of hatchlings like these Hermanns, it's tempting to think, well, perhaps I should have two of them. I mean, at this stage, you're not going to be able to distinguish between them in terms of their gender and to be able to pick out a pair, or indeed two females. But as they get older, there are the identifying characteristics that emerge. But it's worth saying that tortoises actually aren't social by nature. They live solitary lives, they only come together for mating. Their whole mating pattern is such that they don't come together necessarily every year to mate, and yet the female has managed to achieve a way of storing the male sperm and laying fertile eggs for several years, even if she has no encounter with a male during that period. So you don't need to worry about just getting one tortoise and keeping that on its own. If you do get two, yes, you will have probably no problems to start off with, but once they get to about 3, 4, 5, and if you have a male there getting quite interested in females, then the male will pursue the female around the lawn or around its enclosure, snapping at its feet, front feet, back feet, with the idea being to try and slow the tortoise down and then ramming the tortoise as a potential mate with a view to getting up on the shell and mating. And the problem is, in the wild, the female, being larger, can move faster, and if she doesn't want to have the male's attention at that stage, she can just outpace him and disappear. When you have them within a confined area, either a tortoise table or indeed in an enclosure in your garden, the risk is that she will suffer some serious injury, either a damage to the shell or bite marks on her legs as a result of the persistent encounter of a male at this stage. And she also won't be left in peace to feed, so her body condition will go down, which can then have impacts as far as hibernation is concerned. With the legislation as it currently stands, you need to obtain what is called an Article 10 certificate for your tortoise. But since the UK left the EU, it's unclear as to how this is going to continue. Under the present legislation, Horsfield's tortoise is exempt from this requirement, but you need, obviously going forward, to check with DEFRA. The legislation relies on your tortoise having a small microchip placed in its body, and this can be read with a suitable reader, and it will be implanted with a unique number. Once you have that number, you know that is your pet, and it has an advantage that if your pet strays or is stolen in the future, there's any question over whether or not you own that particular tortoise, you can prove it very easily. All it needs is the microchip reader to give the result and confirm that it is your tortoise.